And so here's where the problem comes in. The church, we've drifted over into a destination that we never intended to end up at. We've drifted over into a place where in a lot of churches, whether you acknowledge it or not, what you're trying to do with money looks more like a financial transaction on Sunday morning and not something that's trying to transform you. The kind of thing that Paul talked about in Philippians 4:17 when he says, I wasn't seeking the gift for my own account. I got excited about what happened to you when you gave this, your relationship with God. It's confused our people because when we treat it like a financial transaction on Sunday morning, they actually think that the church is after your money. Well, the church is not after your money because God's not after your money.
Yeah. Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Next Sunday podcast. I'm here with Jim Shepard as always. Super thankful to be with you today.
Wait.
And we're in a different place.
Different place here, Frank.
Yeah, what's this decor we got going on?
What is this decor? Did we change the setting in our podcast
Absolutely
studio?
not.
Did not.
No.
We actually came to Orlando, Florida.
Yeah.
We are sitting at the Creator House, Sweetfish Media, who produces our podcast. And we would say to you, if you're looking to start a podcast, these guys are amazing.
Phenomenal.
We're in their studio.
Yeah.
We're going to run 4 episodes out of here. So
Yeah.
you're going to see this one and 3 more that are going to
That's
come
right.
out of here. And
Yeah.
love the setting.
Yeah, great hospitality. It's been a great experience so far.
We've already got table
Now we're
envy.
getting
We
started.
don't have a table at home. We've
Yeah,
got 2
this
sofas.
table.
We've got
Yeah,
table
this
envy
is-
already. So
This is legit.
probably shouldn't have said that out loud because now they'll be watching to see if we steal it. 'Cause
Yeah.
we wouldn't. We just get the SKU number and we'll order our own.
Yeah, that's it. We'll order our own. Yeah, we
have
won't
that
take
much
theirs.
integrity.
That's exactly right. Well, hey, we're here on
It's
the Next
exciting to be
Sunday
here.
podcast.
Yes,
Yeah, this
cool.
is super fun.
Cool to be here.
We're going to have fun to record some episodes and
Right.
with the whole team here. Man, what a blessing to be a part of this. Today's topic is going to be super practical for you. We hope that it serves you well, as we hope every episode does. This one, we want to get into a very specific issue facing the church in a way that church leaders can address it on a weekly basis, but may not always feel comfortable addressing on a weekly basis. And that's, how do we talk about money in the church? And how do we talk about it frequently enough where it has an impact? And what does God even want us to do with these conversations?
Well, you got my curiosity up. So what are you going to say about all this?
And we're going to flip this. We're going to ask the expert, Jim Shepard. And what you're going to find today is that I'm really good at asking a handful of questions, and you can teach us. I'm just here up on the mountain to learn
where
from
all
you.
the nerve touches are. You can
Yeah,
get
man.
it started. Get it
Yeah,
started.
this is gonna be
you can get
good.
it started. I love this conversation. It's a great topic for us today.
Yeah.
And we've alluded to it some in our other conversations around money and the local church, but I think this one gets we're going to zero in on a really small area and get super laser focused today.
Laser focused. But let's start with, why is money even a conversation? Why does God care about it? Why does it matter in the church? Why do we need to address it in the church? Let's zoom up for a second, make sure we kind of calibrate everybody that's on this, and hopefully come to some sense of agreement on that so that we can drill down and get laser focused on those 3 minutes every Sunday that can make a huge difference for your congregation and your church.
Yeah, I think for us to address this topic, Frank, correctly, I think we've got to kind of name the elephant in the room, at least for you and me. May not be for a lot of other people, but there's an elephant in the room, and it's the confusion that the church has about the conversation on money and faith, right? So for me, I feel like we have to back the tape up a little bit before we can even understand what that is. And when I say that, I mean this. So what is really the role of money in our relationship with God? Well, and I think if we start, we go to what I think is almost a remedial verse. I know I learned it early on, but if we're in Psalm 24:1, this is a fairly easy verse to memorize, so I memorized it. The earth is the Lord's and all its fullness, the world and those who dwell in it. And so it's all His. I mean, we say that sometimes. Oh, it's all His. No, it's all His.
Yeah.
Even what you have in your pocket, what you've been entrusted with, it's His. He didn't give it to you. He loaned it to you.
Yeah.
He didn't transfer the title. He just transferred the management of it, right? And so this whole idea of it's His in the first place, so He doesn't even need me to give my money back to the church so that He can do what He wants to do.
Yeah.
He doesn't need that. But inadvertently, we've let people believe that. And so that's part of the confusion. My opinion, and a big part of what we do at Generis and what we've talked about here on the Next Sunday podcast is, I believe God wants to use money to transform us in a way that almost nothing else can. In a way that almost nothing else can. And so here's where the problem comes in. The church, especially in the last 30 or 40 years, not throwing shade at anyone, because this is what I call, going on a journey without a map. We drifted over into a destination that we never intended to end up at. We've drifted over into a place where in a lot of churches, whether you acknowledge it or not, what you're trying to do with money looks more like a financial transaction on Sunday morning and not something that's trying to transform you. The kind of thing that Paul talked about in Philippians 4:17 when he says, I wasn't seeking the gift for my own account. I got excited about what happened to you when you gave this, your relationship with God, right? And so it's confused our people because when we treat it like a financial transaction on Sunday morning, they actually think that the church is after your money. Well, the church is not after your money because God's not after your money.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's good.
And it would say things like, well, I just think the church wants the money out of my pocket. Well, bro, God doesn't want the money out of your pocket. But here's what I do think he wants. I do believe he wants the idols out of your heart. And he, of all people, knows all too well how much this is one of the chief idols. It competes for our affection. Anything other than God that brings us contentment and happiness at a higher level than our relationship with him, right?
Yeah.
And so I think you heard me say the other day in a setting that you and I were in, I said, the test of an idol is if it's something that brings me a little bit too much happiness, satisfaction, and or contentment, it probably is an idol for me. And the problem is that for many of us, that's what money is. And so that's the conversation we want to have.
Yeah, and that drift that we've talked about over the 10, 20, 30, 40 years, however long it's been in the church where we've gotten more transactional or believe that we've gotten more transactional, I'll have to say it's easier. It's way easier to just communicate the transaction and functionally this is how it's done. I don't have to pray a lot about it. I don't have to explore God's word to communicate how to give. Hey, thank you so much for being here. God's doing something really special in our church. If you want to help us go further, faster, give here. Let me show you how to do that. So we throw up a slide. You can give. You can use this QR code. You can do it online. You can do a check. You can do cash, whatever it may be. That's just really easy. And when you were talking just then, I was reminded of 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 when Paul says, I treated each of you as a father treats their own children, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live a life worthy of God. I think when it comes to money, the church, for the most part, avoids urging. And we're in the high five encouragement level, the most superficial kind of just basic level of like, hey, you can do this. We can do something really great together. And that's as far as we want to go. We don't want to step into the messiness that comes, in my opinion, through that lens of urging. Like, it's like, okay, let me get in your business a little bit. Let me challenge you. Let me disciple you in this area. So instead of getting in their business or their pocketbooks and making them feel uncomfortable, let's just keep this kind of superficial and keep it at the transactional level. We've also seen that this is an opportunity that we've used to allow other people to communicate in our programming. So because we're allowing other people to communicate that may be less experienced or less comfortable, this is a chance for them to kind of get a rep or communicate. It ends up being very transactional. We're not asking them to unpack theology or keep principles out of scripture. We're more like, hey, your giving's making a difference. Here's functionally how do you do that? So we've drifted. And I've seen that over and over and over again. You have too. Yeah. Church after church after church. And even if they don't want to do that, there's a natural drift. That is the gravitational pull. I truly believe that. It's easier in the stress of planning Sundays and all the other stuff that you've got to manage. It is just easier to check it off the list and be like, hey, if you want to know how to give, let me tell you how to give and just move on. That doesn't fix any of the idol issues that we have in our heart. It doesn't transform anything at all. So how do we change, before we get into what it could look like on a Sunday morning, how do we change our hearts as a church? How do we actually make that shift to where we feel the weight that this is our responsibility to really do this on a systematic, consistent way to address this? Because as we know, Jesus taught more about money than any other single topic in the Gospels that I'm aware of. So he talked about a lot for some reason. It was relevant, it was clear, it mattered, and it was an issue. He knew it would be an issue for us. And yet we're trying to tuck it in a sermon series every once in a while, kind of, sort of. And then honestly, the edge that oftentimes those sermons are written with, the edge gets softened the closer we get to Sunday, to where we don't want to step on too many toes. And so, and even by saying this, I know I'm stepping on some people's toes by saying this, but I think something's got to give.
Yeah. So let's start with this, Frank. Let me just make sure that people heard what I said and maybe a little bit of what I didn't say but meant to say. I don't actually think it's unfair for our people the way we've treated them the last 30 or 40 years, because I don't think this was true in my father's church, right? So in this expression that we call the modern church, started with the seeker-sensitive movement, I think that's really where it found its roots. It's an inadvertent thing, but it happened, and here we are. And so the way that we treat it on Sunday morning, I actually don't think it's unfair for people to come to the conclusion of, well, you just want my money, right? It's not unfair for them to think, because we haven't made it transformational, we've made it transactional. For many of our churches, I'm not going to name any. You can, all of you, you do use your own diagnostic. To me, many times the conversation about money in the church on Sunday morning during the giving moment sounds like an appeal that I might hear at a nonprofit banquet. There's nothing to differentiate that between Sunday. And by the way, I love nonprofits.
Yeah, sure.
But it's not the role of the nonprofits to disciple people and teach them how to be a great steward with what God's put in your hands, right? The definition of a steward is that you've been put in charge of something that is not yours, and your chief aim is to manage it in the best interest of the owner.
Yeah.
Not you, the owner, God himself, right? So that's what we're trying to do with giving, to help people find their good stewardship in God's presence on Sunday morning. So, we've said it, we say it this time. We actually said it last Sunday in a service that you and I were in together. Giving is not the mark of a believer. That's not the mark of a believer. The why we give is the mark of a believer. I mean, unbelievers give. Some of them give very extravagantly.
Sure.
I mean, some of the billionaires in America have given extraordinary amounts of money to combat, disease in Africa and things that we would all like to see resolved. So that's not the mark of a believer. The mark of a believer is that we see it as worship. We see it as bringing something back, not really giving. I mean, think about it for a second. We call it giving a lot. But it's not really giving because it's not yours in the first place.
Yeah.
So, hey, Frank, you loaned me $100. I'm giving you $10. No, you're bringing back $10. That's what we're saying, in the scriptures. And so part of that is just making sure that we clarify what's really going on there. That is, by the way, that is the predominant word in the Old Testament, is bringing.
Yeah.
Right? And that's worship. That signifies who God is, how much you trust him, how much you honor him, how much you revere him. All of those things are embedded in that, and we're missing these opportunities for transformation because we've made it just a transaction. And I really believe, Frank, as I watch this, I think that's where all the pushback is rooted, is they've allowed it to become transactional. And so when you're asking for more, it's a transaction, and you're asking for a transaction, you're not trying to change me with that.
So that creates a culture where fixing it is harder.
Harder.
Yeah, it's going to be very difficult.
Because you're going to, as soon as you try to change the language, Frank, you and I both know the skeptics and the cynics are going to come out of the woodwork. Oh, yeah. Pastor, I see what you're trying to do. That's a good shake and move. That's a juke there. I see what you're trying to do. You want to make it about me, but you really need some money to balance the budget. No, I'm actually not trying to balance the budget.
Yeah.
I just want you to be able to give an answer to God for what he's put under your hands.
Absolutely.
That's the answer.
We talk about the 3 minutes, and this is in programming, there's oftentimes about 3 minutes to talk about giving or kind of take aside this moment. What I've seen a lot is that those 3 minutes are announcements and giving. And so giving is getting a fraction of it, and it really is. And oh, by the way, if you want to give, there's a slide or something, or scan the QR code on the back of your chair or whatever it may be, you go to our website and literally that's it. So there's not even a what you're giving to. It's just like we have to do this as part of our service. Right. So we've got to get away from that. Yeah. So if we were to say and believe the facts that say that the people that attend our church are not there every Sunday. Okay, they're not attending every Sunday. Majority are not. Okay, so if they're not going to be consistent, we have to be consistent. So that means that we need to, if we believe that we're called, and no one else is going to do this other than us, disciple people around God and money. I don't think they're going to get this information or insight anywhere else. If the church isn't doing it, the schools aren't doing it. The financial planning saving service isn't doing it. The
nonprofits are not doing
accountant isn't doing it for you. Your tax person isn't doing it for you. So if it's not the church, then I would say, then who? And if we're going to hit it every once in a while in a sermon, once a year, we missed a bunch of people. And yet I think we can all agree, everybody listening on this can say money is an issue in America. Like, people are navigating how to handle money properly, how to treat money in their lives, when to give, when to save, when to just splurge on themselves. Yeah. They're all wrestling with it. So if that's true, I think we've found, and we have enough case studies where this is no longer anecdotal, to say that 3 minutes every Sunday, discipling and focusing on handling this issue and educating on this issue can be a game changer for your congregation. And I'll finish with this, and then you can take it wherever you want to, Jim. I want to be clear. If you're not doing this in your church, no one else is helping them navigate this.
Yeah. So let's go with where it gets rooted. You and I both know this. You know this better than I do. You've been on church staff. You've seen the planning sequence that happens every week for the service. And what we know is there's this tyranny of protecting that 60 to 70 minutes, whatever your service interval is. Generally 60 to 70. I think most churches are in that range. Every minute becomes important, and there's somebody fighting for, it's like turf. They're fighting for that turf. And what you and I are saying is there needs to be a 3-minute segment in there that is protected as the giving or the offering moment, where you have an opportunity to talk transformationally about faith and money every single week, 156 minutes a year. 3 times 52. You didn't think I could do that math, and I did that.
Very
that was
impressed.
Really quick.
I
really did that before we started, so I wouldn't trip up.
Yeah,
I did get that right.
Good job.
But think about that, 156 minutes a year, Frank. Here's what I would say. I wouldn't say don't preach a sermon series, but if you could do this well enough, you might not even need a sermon series during the week. Because here's what I can tell you. You start to 2 or 3, especially if you're in a transactional culture, you're going to have the doubters, you're going to have the skeptics, and you start a 2 or 3 week sermon series on faith and money, giving, stewardship, whatever you want to call it, you're going to get some emails. Yeah. I don't think you're going to get any emails about a 3-minute offering moment.
Yeah.
That's not where the pushback comes. And what you're doing is you're unleashing what I call a drip sequence, where it gets inside of you, and at some point it's transformed you, and you didn't even realize somebody was doing that to you. And you flip the script on everything that you've done in the life of your church, right? And so starting that, I know of one pastor who just went out and he said, hey, I just need to come out and apologize to you. I've had this wrong for a long time, and I had my eyes opened, and I now understand, and I want to tell you that from this day forward, this is not going to be a transactional conversation in my church. It's going to be transformation. I want to start today. I want to start by telling you what giving has done for me and for my wife. I want to tell you a little bit of our giving story. That's one way. It's not the only way. Yeah. But sometimes, just so you can engineer kind of a turn in the road, you do have to do something like that. You have to say, hey, I have not done this right, but I want you to hold me accountable. Starting today, I'm going to do this right. It's all going to be about your relationship with God, not about the money that we need, right? Because here's what we know. We're always focusing on redirecting the resources. The focus is on reorienting the heart. Because if you reorient the heart, then by design, the reorientation of the redirection of the resources will take place. Yeah. It'll absolutely take place, right? And you'll probably have more, I'm going to borrow some words, more than you can think or imagine. Yeah. You're trying to fill a budget gap, and God's trying to flood your church with people who are spiritually full of what he intends to do with money, and he's got all of that out there, and you're trying to fill an 8% shortfall in your budget, and God's like, come on, man, there's more than that. Yeah. I just want people to stand before me and be able to give a good answer, and you're not pastoring them well. That, to me, is really the gap here, Frank, if I look at it, right? we're gonna talk about this in another episode, and we'll go a little bit deeper on this. But I do want to just make reference to, Matthew 25:16 through 30, the parable of the talents, where Jesus is explaining stewardship to us. And there's only, and the phrase that we all want to hear is embedded there. Well done, good and faithful servant. It doesn't appear anywhere else in the text. It's not anywhere else. It's in one place and one place only, and it's in a stewardship story, right? But the other side of that is wicked and lazy is in there as well, because the guy who had the one talent, he just went and put it in the backyard and said, I wanted to make sure you had it because I knew you were a harsh master and you would expect something. We'll unpack the deeper meaning of that later on. But the point is, I want to pastor you in a way that you've got a better chance of hearing well done, good and faithful than wicked and lazy. And when I'm not talking about this transformationally and teaching you what it means to live before God with what he's put under your hands, I'm leaving it to chance that you might or might not hear well done, good and faithful servant.
Yeah. That's so good. I love the frequency and the cadence of doing this every week for a couple reasons. One, people are wrestling with their finances on a daily, hourly, and certainly weekly basis. So they're already navigating. This is a real practical tension that they're facing. We do this with everything else in church, like back to school. We're talking and addressing what it looks like for families adjusting into a new season and kids going off to college. And we're addressing these needs as they arise because we know that people are going in different seasons. We hopefully at our church are addressing during November and December how hard it can be to bring families back together. And for some, that can be a real difficult time. And we're praying for them and teaching how they navigate seeing that uncle that they don't get along with very well. We do this seasonally and timely. When it comes to giving, we feel like we're talking about it too much. And yet when it comes to handling our finances, we're wrestling with it all the time. So that frequency is critical. The other thing is your 156 minutes is great. But nobody in your congregation is hearing all 156 minutes. So we must be consistent because they're consistently navigating the problem. But at the end of the day, they're not going to be there that much. They might hear 36 minutes a year of us talking about money. And so we're like, oh, well, I just don't want to hit it too hard or just be in your face. I promise you, the people that are there super frequently, they have no problem with you talking about this because they're the faithful ones that are oftentimes giving and navigating this, and they're very comfortable with their church and they're happy with it. So we're sitting there going, oh, well, I don't want to hit it too often. Well, you're implying that they're there all the time, and they're simply not. And so we've got to make consistent deposits. So here's what I'd love to do, Jim. Give me a 3-minute talk. Take 3 minutes, process, and go, okay, you're getting up there, and you've got to do, I don't have a timer, so it doesn't have to be exactly 3 minutes.
Yeah. I was scared that I thought you might have a timer.
Nope, I can do that if you want, but and you better hit it. No. Give us an example of what it looks like to get up and just share a transformational message in 3 minutes. This is what in the questions. I'm putting you on the spot. You've done this a million times. You've taught this a million times, so I know you can. But give us an example of what that 3 minutes look like. But while you're thinking about it, I'll tell you the 1 minute. Okay, I'll tell you the 1 minute version. Let me show you how to give. And we have a website. And if you've never used the internet before, here's how to go to the website. And then you click this button. Like that's the current talk in most congregations and settings. Yeah. Or, hey, by the way, I don't know if you know this or not, but giving helps us do what we do in ministry. So we'd appreciate it if you'd consider giving here. That's the end of the talk. So we're not discipling or teaching much. So give us an example of what 3 minutes could look like that could have power, that could be discipling, that could make a difference in the lives of the people in our congregation.
So I want to back up I've got a specific verse and I want to make sure I get it right. So I'm going to turn to it in here. While I'm turning to that, let me just say a couple of things. I think one of the challenges, Frank, is this whole idea of planning the service every week. You and I both know that. You've been on staff. I haven't, but you know this all too well. Whether you're using Planning Center or whatever it is, you are charting out every second in that service and everybody who's in there doing something. And so typically when you do that, they've got the 1 minute, but wait, you want 2 more minutes? I don't know where we're going to get that from. Well, we need to find it.
Yeah.
We need to find it because it's a priority. If we're going to teach God's people what it means to manage God's money in a way that would honor God, then we need to spend the time to do that. So that planning sequence, and the way that I describe it when people are asking me about it, there's nothing wrong with your giving moment that some focus and intentionality wouldn't make it come alive.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole thing. It's just not focused and it's not intentional.
Yeah.
Right? If you're speaking for 3 minutes, Frank, I don't know about you. I mean, I'm pretty comfortable speaking. I think 3 minutes is harder to prepare for than 40 minutes, frankly, because you've got to be really good with every word. Every word counts. Every word matters. Yeah. And you want to make sure that you're really good with that 3 minutes, that you stand up, say what needs to be said, and that you sit down and you've spoken with power and conviction. And you don't need to tell people how to give because you can show that on the screen. And in most of our churches, the literacy rate is high enough that people can read what's behind you, so you don't need to spend time on that.
Yeah.
Spend time on something that actually does matter, right? So if we go to Deuteronomy 14, starting with verse 22, that's where I want to, it's one of my favorite. If you're trying to engineer a change in the language in your church and you're going to start doing better offering moments, this is one of my favorites. And I'll tell you why in just a minute. Because I think it sets the stage for so many things. In fact, I would probably do this one in my first 12 months. I'd do it 4 times. I'd do once every 3 months because people are not going to remember, and the people who do remember need to be reminded. And of course, as you've said, not everybody's going to hear all 156 minutes anyway.
Yeah.
So I would start it and I would say, hey, this morning, friends, the offering is one of the oldest traditions in the church. You probably didn't think about that. It goes back thousands of years. I'm going to take you to a place in the Old Testament this morning. I want to take you to Deuteronomy, the 14th chapter, and I want to start with verse 22 and read 2 or 3 verses there. It says, "Truly, you shall truly tithe all the increase of your grain that the field produces year by year, and you shall eat," this phrase, "before the Lord your God," I'll say a word about that in a minute outside of my 3 minutes. "Eat before the Lord your God in the place where he chooses." We want to come back to that one as well. "To make his name abide, the tithe of your grain and your new wine and your oil of all the firstborn of your herds and your flocks." And here it is, Frank, right here in that verse at the end, "that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always." Friends, this morning, as we give here on this Sunday in 2024, the reason that we give this morning and the reason that these children of Israel gave when the writer of Deuteronomy recorded these words is the exact same reason, that we might learn to fear. That's to revere, honor, not fear as in afraid, but revere and honor the name of the Lord our God always. And I don't know, but maybe you came in this morning and you thought that you were giving to fund the budget of our church, and that's just not what you're here for. That happens, but that's not what you're here for. You're here for this verse. So today, I pray that every one of us, led by the Holy Spirit, might learn to revere the Lord, the name of the Lord our God, always as we give this morning. Can I pray for us? Right?
That's so good.
And most people have never heard that. A lot of pastors, when I go to this voice, they're like, whoa, because we're trotting out the same familiar things over and over again. And I like all of those. I mean, they're good. But I just don't know that we need to trot out Malachi 3:10 all the time. That's the one that we always try. It's a valid teaching. I love it. But it's not the one that's going to move most people. They need to hear something else, right? Something that would, when it gets inside of them, it would transform their view of why they're even doing this in the first place. Yeah. And you saw where I added that in. Hey, you may have come in here this morning and thought that you were giving to fund our budget. That's not why you're giving this morning. Yeah. I want to flip the script on why you might have thought you're giving so I can teach you why you're really giving.
Yeah.
And this is, depending on when you think this happened, it's probably somewhere between, 3,000 and 4,000 years ago. It's roughly 1,000 BC, maybe a little bit before that. Different people have different takes on that. So here's the other thing, Frank, just off to a little side road, but a relevant side road. So people will ask, well, why should I give that to the local church? I can give it some other places, right? This whole idea, before the Lord your God, in the place where he chooses, was always at a place of worship. So it was the tents and poles when they were wandering in the desert. Mm-hmm. It was the tabernacle, the original mobile church, by the way, which is much nicer than any mobile church you've ever seen. And if you don't believe that, just go in there and look at the description of how ornate the tabernacle was. And they carried that thing around on poles, bro. That was serious, right? Or the temple. It always is there. So people are asked, in Malachi, people use the storehouse example. And I'm not saying that's not a good example. I just think this is better. This is repeated throughout the Old Testament, right? At the place where the Lord chooses, in the presence of the Lord, that is always in a place of worship. Either the tents and poles, the tabernacle, or the temple itself, right? So it's like an almost irrefutable argument that that's where you start your giving. we're not here today to discuss whether the tithe belongs in the church or, we'll cover that in another conversation probably. But the point is that your primary giving starts in a place of worship, so that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always, right? And if we're not teaching that, see, now we've begun to flip the script. Now it's really hard for you to look at me and say, well, you just want the money out of my pocket. No, I want you to learn to fear the Lord your God always. That's what I want for you. I want to reorient your heart so you now see money in a different light. And once you do that, you'll probably do something different with it. And if it comes to our church, great, but that's not really our primary goal.
That is so good. Great teaching. Love it. Everybody should just rip that off.
I'm pretty confident that wasn't but like 2.5 minutes. I've done that verse many times.
Yeah, it was 2.5.
Right.
Yeah, you're right.
It's 2.5.
Yeah.
And so the point, here's why I brought up the whole idea of the planning sequence, Frank. If you're not putting this in your planning sequence, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. So, hey, Frank, you're up this week. Jim's preaching. Mm-hmm. He's doing the message. He's in the series. We know what he's teaching this week. You got 3 minutes on Sunday, Frank. What are you talking? Yeah, I'm going to be on Deuteronomy 14, 22, and 23. I'm going to be teaching on that. And I'll have my talk done by Sunday. But that's hey, that sounds great. That sounds great. We love that. We haven't done that one before. That would be a great one to talk on. So you're putting focus and intentionality in it rather than Frank just walking up there at the time of offering and it's 2 minutes before he's got, oh, gosh, what am I going to say? Oh, I'm just going to tell them how to give and, you support the work that we do here. Yeah. That's great, and we want to know that, but nonprofits do that.
Yeah.
The church has to do something different, and that's what I'm saying here. We've got to do something that focuses on the spiritual aspect of why you're doing this in the first place. Yeah. And that's your 3 minutes every Sunday that we want to focus on.
I love it. What do you say to the person that 3 minutes, 156 minutes a year is just too much? The time and the messages are just the time and the services are just too valuable. We can't give up 3 minutes every single week. That just seems excessive. Our people aren't going to like it, but also we have too many other things we want to do during that time. What would you say to somebody that pushes back and says, we just can't do it this frequently? We get it. We got to talk better about it. We got to teach better about it. But just the frequency is an issue for me. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, two things. I'd push back once, and then let's see what happens there. So just for clarity, can you tell me what would be more important than discipling your people well in this area of their lives? Mm-hmm. And if you do have something that you think is more important, then I would say, okay, well, let's go from 3 to 2. So that would at least give you 2 minutes a week, and I could actually do that one that I just did. Mm-hmm. I could do that in 2 minutes if you press me for it.
Yeah.
And there's lots of others I could do in 2 minutes as well. But have that week. 1 minute is not enough because you're already doing 1 minute and it's meaningless.
Right.
So let's take the meaningless minute out and let's put in a meaningful 3 minutes, or if you really push back hard, 2. But I would just say, really, Pastor, what's more important on a weekly basis? What is it that the element that you believe this is crowding out that's more important than discipling your people well? Yeah. In an area where nobody's talking to them about it. Nobody.
As best I can tell, that's the key, that if we don't get that right, if we don't believe that to be true, none of this is going to work. Like, we have to actually believe that we want this for our congregation, that we're called and responsible to teach and explain this in a different way. I will say, and we'll talk about this in future outlines and sessions of next Sunday, there's a time to talk about your giving is doing good work. Let me show you that in action. So we're not saying that shouldn't be part of the story. At the end of the day, even when we're sharing that, we're saying it through the lens and for the purpose of discipleship. Right. I think the same reason we do communion in our church, the same reason we do worship, the same reason we do prayer and we do messages, it's all through the lens of discipleship.
Yeah.
And so if we truly believe that, now we're taking that, hey, you gave so that we could, even that story now says, you know what? When I shared that story with you, I hope you felt proud. I hope that really resonated with you, that I'm a part of this, that God is doing something in and through me. We want you to feel that way. We love that you're doing that. Like, affirm that, like, you should feel good about what we just achieved. At the end of the day, God wants to just show you that your generosity does something in your heart. And we have seen that over and over again. I love to teach my kids, whenever we get an opportunity to be generous, they are always overjoyed in that interaction. Now, when they don't understand it, I haven't explained it well, that's on me. But if we choose to go above and beyond with a server or somebody else, they are filled with so much joy. And yet here we are worried about people that are going to be so negative and angry about us talking about generosity. And yet that alone indicates that there's some issue with the heart. Yeah. Because we ultimately want it to be something where we're rejoicing that we get to be able to serve this way and do this. And we have a philosophical shift of we're just giving back what God's already entrusted our care. And it can feel really great that we're doing something right with it, that we're moving the right direction. I think there's a real reason that God allows us to experience such incredible joy when we sacrifice and give for others.
So I love the fact, Frank, that you called out this idea. It's okay to say that there's great stuff happening as a result that you give, but it can't monopolize the conversation. That's the problem with many churches. They haven't figured out what else to say. So it's either they just go through the ways to give, or they talk about, hey, we did some really great stuff this week. And you want to have that as a part of the conversation, because I want you, as a leader in the church, I want you to know that I'm asking you to be a good steward, that we're being good stewards of what you've entrusted to us, that we're stewarding it toward impact, toward reaching people and doing work that God wants us to do, right? And so that's a big thing. It's not that that's not a part of the conversation. It's just not the main part. I would parcel up the 52 weeks of the year. Different people have a different take on this. For me, it would be 36, 12, and 4. 36 times a year, I would use the Bible. Talk about some aspect of giving straight from the Bible. 12 times a year, I would tell a story of how we've impacted somebody or some group of people. And then 4 times a year, the other topic I believe we need to cover in this 3 minutes is trust. Trust is just, particularly with the younger givers in your church, they are struggling with issues of trust. They actually don't trust you until you earn their trust. And so even though you haven't abused their trust, you've got to earn their trust and make sure they know. It's transparency in numbers. It's transparency in leadership. And how do we do these things? And so 4 times a year, someone from your board, your elders, or somebody comes up, hi, my name's Jim Shepard. My background is accounting and finance. I serve on the elder board here at our church. And guess what? I've gotten responsibility for a lot of accounting and financial matters. So I'd love to give you just a brief overview this morning of how we make financial decisions so that you'll know you can trust us when you give here, right? So you've got to add all of that in, but your primary thing is that teaching scripturally. What does it mean? What does it mean for you to deal with this correctly? And again, the big idea, Matthew 25, 16 through 30, you're going to give an answer. I want to help you give a good answer.
That's so good, Jim. Jim, thanks for taking the time today to take us from 30,000 feet to 10,000 feet to on the ground practical level of what we do to disciple and teach in this area. You are a wealth of knowledge. We're going to talk about this a lot more on future Next Sunday podcast. But hey, for today, we are wrapping up with another great episode of Next Sunday. We hope to see you again soon.
Next Sunday, it could change everything.